It's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 1-2, having to call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today reviewing the BC-12T. This is a tier 8 French light tank that is quite interesting and quite a lot of fun, if I can say so. Now, I know I've been taking quite a while to release these videos. I started like about 1 or 2 weeks ago with the, 2 or 3 weeks ago with the French light tank reviews, and I need to speed up the process. So I'm going to be making this video, then I'm going to be making the AMX 1390 video soon as well, and then we're going to finish it up with the 13105. I have the crew ready, I have everything ready for these tanks. I just have to play it more to get the gameplays ready. And certainly with the BC-12T, I just had to get like the crew on a specific level where I can still kind of compete. And I just didn't really have the conviction to play the BC-12T as much because my crew was quite atrocious. And I didn't want to spend any kind of resources on training the crew much further than this. I need the commander to be at a certain level, but to be fair, the gunner, and so, it would be great if they had like more skills, but you make do with what you have. So this is a tank that is quite a lot of fun because it certainly has a better 75mm gun than the AMX 1375. Certainly there's a little bit of an upgrade. Also, the platform changes, which is a little bit of an interesting choice, considering that the AMX 1390 goes back to the old platform. This is also, I think, a tank that is a bit larger than the 13 series because the turret is situated at the front or in the middle instead of at the back. This is also a turret that is new now, and it's not the same turret that we have on the 1390. But other than that, it's still pretty atrocious in terms of survivability. You have a 75mm gun, you have two choices, and this one has 170 alpha damage. You still have 4 rounds in your magazine. You can see my rate of fire is not as good because my gunner is not trained to 100%, but that's fine because it still works. Average penetration goes up by a bit, by about 30mm. It's still not at the top, but I think that these shells are actually quite okay, especially the APCR shells. They go up to 210mm of penetration now, which is still not great, but I think for what you're doing with your light tank, it's still going to be working out fine. I am not running any high explosive shells, neither am I running a single clip, because I don't have intuition trained on my commander, or I have it on my commander, but I don't have it on my my gunner, as you can see, because my gunner is basically level 0. And that means high explosive is not going to be worth it if I have to reload the entire clip and I cannot use intuition. Gun traverse is decent, rate of fire is okay as well. I think you can work with that. It still has 6 degrees of gun depression, 13 degrees of gun elevation, but the aim time dispersion, even for the current setup as I have, like even though my crew is not 100%, I don't have brothers in arms, it still works quite nicely. So this tank actually works fairly well, even in a scenario where your crew is not 100%. Damage per minute does suffer a little bit, and it's not going to be your main damage dealer of a tank. That's just something you have to get used to. I think the style looks really, really cool. I got it out of the Amazon Prime bundle, so keep that in mind. Armor-wise, it gets worse. The turret is actually worse, or the hull is worse than on the 1375. And the turret is actually also worse than on the 1375. You also have 1000 HP, so try to stay hidden. Try not to get spotted because your armor is non-existent. The armor that you have in this tank is the incredibly mobile portion. You have a 400 horsepower engine on this vehicle, which in turn means that you have incredible specific power to weight ratio of 32.52 horsepower per ton and a top speed of 68 kph. So you do gain quite a bit in terms of mobility. If we go over to the tier 7, you can see even the premium one, 63 kph with a turbo or 63 without a turbo on the AMX 1375. So you do get better mobility. Your traverse speed does drop a little bit, but it is not at 100% with my driver. As you can see right there, it's 112%, and it certainly is going to be better. But it feels still, in my opinion, it still feels good enough so that you can still turn your tank in time. Concealment wise, this tank, I am running one directive, which is the camouflage directive, because it's important to stay hidden in this tank. This tank is less concealed than the 1375, but with equipment, with the training, Brothers in Arms, premium consumables, this tank is certainly going to be hidden fairly well. That's exactly what they expect you to be. They expect you to be a good passive scout, which in turn can be active when it needs to be, and you can go and engage targets with this 75mm gun. I actually have been using the gun much more than being a passive scout, because the maps that I've been getting were just not very suited for passive scouting, but I still think that this tank is fairly competent in a role as a passive scout and also to fight back when it has to. But your gun is not going to be good enough against tier 9, tier 10 opponents, which you will meet since you're a tier 8. But then that's exactly where you need to be a good passive scout to get in the assistance damage instead of the damage that you deal yourself. So the turret, you can see 380 meter space view range, so 452 with the coded optics that we are running and with my commander. That's something you might want to improve. You could also run several different setups. I have a setup right now that is quite balanced for all the tasks I need to have. You can see I'm currently not on every single field modification yet, because it still takes a time, and I haven't been able to play a whole bunch of games on the BC-12T in the recent time. But I have played enough that I can still make a review. I really like this tank, and I've been able to catch some games where I can show the quintessential part of the vehicle. It's different from the 1375 in terms of mobility and in terms of armament, but it still kind of plays exactly the same as the other French light tank. So in terms, if you've played through them, you're still going to be able to play just fine with this one. And it's like the great thing, you're learning like the next step, and you're always upgrading every once in a while, and you're kind of using the skills that you have prior achieved to the next level, and then you're improving upon. That's like the ideal version. And then you have the AMX 13105 at the end of the line, and that's where you can really use all of the skills that you've learned prior. So talking about the equipment, I went with improved ventilation because the crew skills are quite important for me. I would definitely use vertical stabilizers because this tank does have quite terrible dispersion, especially if your crew is not at 100%. And coded optics just for better view range. I don't think you need anything regarding turbocharger or improved rotation mechanism. You do have like worse traverse speed, but it's still doable, still fine. What you want to do with this tank is you want to have great view range, you want to be hidden, so low noise exhaust, and maybe commander's vision for a full scouting setup as the number 2 lineup would be a great choice, with maybe improved ventilation or with coded optics. That's just something that I could recommend. But I'm running a setup that is quite essential for me because it saves me a lot of money. I don't have to get a second kind of equipment slot. Either way, let's jump to the gameplay and see what the BC-12T has to offer. This is the one gameplay I'm going to show you guys, just one today, because I think it's been rather difficult to actually get into tier 9, tier 10 matches, which is a good thing, but I mainly had tier 6, 7 matches in my tier 8 BC-12T, and I don't want to constantly show you guys like tier 6, 7 matches, and I rarely even get into like full tier 8 matches. It's kind of weird, but I'm not really sure what is happening with Matchmaker, but it's really difficult to get some good spotting gameplays because the map selections are kind of weird sometimes. Not a lot of open maps, more city maps, and as I mentioned, the matchmaking with the tiers is really weird because obviously these tanks do have HP. There's a pool of 13,285 damage that can be dealt to the enemy team. But somehow, you know, against tier 6 tanks, it's quite a lot harder to spot effectively and get more assistance damage. because you also always need to have some support at the back. But either way, we're playing on Empire's Border, and to be fair, I had this map off for 3 months, and I took it back into the rotation, but it still is a pretty bad map. Wargaming did promise us that they would fix this map, but that promise has not yet been fulfilled. So, yeah, one thing I like to do when I play this map is I usually like to go to the middle. You can see we have 4 BC-12Ts in this matchup, which is fairly interesting. The enemy BC-12T moves into the middle, suicides, and yeah, basically immediately goes back to the garage. We hit him twice, but I wanted to point out that when you play this tank, you know, you have 1000 HP, you don't have any armor. Tier 6 tanks will be extremely dangerous to you because they have a very high rate of fire, and usually when they spot you, every single gun will turn towards your direction. That's gonna happen in just a second. So what you can see immediately in this matchup, which is fairly random and doesn't happen as often whenever I play this map, the enemy team is basically bunching up all their forces on the northeast. You can see that the southeast, where usually there are heavy tanks, nobody is playing that. The IS-3 and the ARL are extremely cautious. They're not moving forward on our side. And we immediately get pummeled because we thought it was a good idea to take on the Cromwell beam. This was the time where I realized that the majority of the enemy force must be in the northeast and they're trying to push into our spawn. So this is the moment where we are going to be trying out the 75mm gun, which I think is fairly nice, but lacks the penetration. You can see even sniping at like 400 or 500 meters, you usually do not have an issue getting these shots on target, especially with this 1000 meters per second shell velocity. The only downside that you have is that, well, you're still going to be reloading for about 15 seconds for a fully loaded clip. And now we can finally actually get a little bit of scouting action, because now it's all about how do we confront this danger, which is basically a huge horde of enemy tanks that are coming in towards our position. Now, when you're spotting in World of Tanks, it only really ever helps you out when the vehicles that are on your team actually help you out. It only helps when they shoot the targets that you light up for them, and this is finally a very good example of how well it can work when you have 2 or 3 designated marksmen sitting behind you, taking pop shots at targets that you light up for them. So you can see that the enemy tank just lost 2 vehicles. They lost the Cromwell, they lost the Nashorn, both tanks that are decent enough, good tier 6 vehicles. Nashorn is great at sniping, and there we spot the Thunderbolt. So basically, in this situation, all we have to do is we have to stop the enemies that are still in the middle at like C9 and D8 from advancing towards our cap. Now, the issue is we do not have sideways towards the 0 line, because that's too far and out of render distance for us, or spotting distance. Now, the issue is, since this is the only bush that I can really work safely, I don't have an option to go over here without getting spotted by the Thunderbolt, who's still sitting on the corner. So I'm just waiting for the IS-6, because he's going to be the most dangerous opponent right now. And you can see that on our side, the 1-2 line, we're currently having our ARL and our IS-3 pushing the SU-130PM. Now, the SU-130PM right there, he's the only tank right there. They have one more tank at base, but sadly for us, we got lit up by a Skoda T25, who has been sitting probably at D4 the entire game. Now, that means for us, we are getting lit up, but we managed to take him out of the game with some help from the Charioteer, who has been shooting the targets that we've been spotting. But the issue is we take a big hit from the IS-6. That thing, that guy immediately swiveled his turret around and put a big round into us, because I was the only target he could actually engage. Now, we try to go back into the bush, but obviously when you're doing that, you have to be quite cautious, because the Thunderbolt did decide to move forward. He spots us because it's just about 300 meters, less than 300 meters, and even a Thunderbolt at tier 6 will spot you at those distances. And I'm just kind of very worried. I don't want to face the IS-6 or the wrath of the IS-6, so I decide to knock a couple of trees down to see if I can actually get some shots on targets they're still crossing that open space. Now, I just want to say that that is probably one of the worst positions you can be on in this map, especially when the enemy team has control of the middle. It's because you're just going to be like in a shooting gallery. Now, I did not account for this. I thought the IS-6, who obviously was crossing towards the 0 line, I first always thought that the IS-6 was going to go towards our cap, because I thought that their numbers were about to, attack our cap, take out the Type 58, the MX-1375, and clear out all of the remaining tanks there, and they would just kind of ignore us, because moving up here, they just don't have enough numbers to take us on, the Charioteer and me, and at the same time worry about their own base at the back and, attack our cap, because we still have about equal numbers. Now, I did not expect the IS-6, which is maybe a good thing for them, or maybe a bad thing, depending on how you see it. I did not expect the IS-6 to make a move up here. He catches me off guard, knocks me out, gets the kill. We end up with 1,887 damage dealt and about 2,500 damage assisted. But the IS-6 with that move kind of made himself a prime target for the Charioteer, and he picks him off quite easily. So now they don't have any more options of pushing our base. They've lost their base, they've lost their tier 8s, and basically it's all about just the cleanup. So yeah, the AMX, or the BC-12T, I think we can go right into the review right now. It's a tank that is really mobile. Its biggest downsides in mobility, though, is the track traverse. It feels a bit sluggish when you're turning a tank. It could do with the fact that my crew is not at a complete 100% yet, but you certainly should improve the traverse speed when you get the chance to do so. The gun itself, it's still a gun that is fitted for a light tank. It's not going to be ripping out any trees or something like that. The premium shell penetration is at 211 millimeters, I think, and that is fine enough for tier 8 and tier 9 games, but anything above, you do run quite into a bit of trouble. You do have to utilize premium shells quite often with this tank, sadly. I've noticed myself that okay, why is it not working? Either way, I've noticed myself that the BC-12T, or it's actually not BC, it's the BC-12T or something. It's a special name. It actually is a pretty good scout. And I like the platform. Even though I come from the AMX-13 series, I like the platform, and I think it's a nice addition on top of the French light tank line. And it's kind of like the final form that the AMX-1375 will take. It's the final form where the French use a 75mm gun, which they have used for the tier 6, the tier 7, now the tier 8. But it's a different kind of variation where the shell velocity gets better, or it's the same as with this the prior tier. But overall, just the characteristics become better, and it's kind of hit its limitations, because tier 8, tier 9, you really do need bigger calibers to stay combat effective when you're trying to fight tanks. So this is exactly where the cut happens, and you move on over to the AMX 1390, and the 1390 becomes a whole new kind of beast, because finally you get an increase in the caliber of shells that you fire, and it becomes a very interesting kind of scenario. So I think the BC-12T is certainly a very good finish to the entire line of that kind of in that kind of sense. But now it moves on over to the 1390, and that's where it really becomes a really interesting French light tank line. I still think I would give this vehicle an 8 out of 10 because it does everything pretty well. It does mobility well, except for the gun, the track traverse. It does the gun handling pretty well. It spots quite well. I think it's 380 meters base view range, if I recall correctly. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the 1390 because that's where it really starts for me. So it's still a little bit on the cusp, the edge, where it really becomes like really special. But I think it's a nice ending to the 75mm caliber of the French light tanks. So I hope you guys did enjoy. As always, comment, like, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Tell me, what do you think about the Batchat 12T or the BC-12T? Do you like this light tank? Did you skip it? Did you just go for the AMX 1390 when it was out first and it was the tier 8? Did you skip the French light tanks? Why do you like the French light tanks? And I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one and enjoy.